I'll make a start then. Hi everybody, I'm Andrea Kemp and I'm here on behalf of the Green Spring Network, which is a Derbyshire and Derby kind of network of green providers who are all working to enable people, particularly struggling with their mental health, to access green space and nature-based experiences. I've been working on this probably for just over a year now, and I joined the national pilot that Derbyshire was part of midway. And so I'm going to talk about some of the issues that we were finding as part of that pilot work, and then how we used this opportunity through some personalisation funding to kind of explore a different type of model to social prescribing, which was very much based around working at the grassroots with the providers themselves, rather than working at the referral end, which is what we've been doing quite a lot of. My background is essentially sport and physical activity and enabling people to be active, but I've also worked quite a lot around system change and leadership, so this all connects really well. Anyway, great to see you all, and I'll talk, and then I think I'll leave plenty of time for questions, because it would be really good to have a conversation about this rather than me just talking. So if you could show the next slide, please, Sarah. So, like I said, the emerging work through the pilot was indicating that a lot of the organisations working in communities of different shapes and sizes were finding that they were not getting the level of referrals that they were hoping for, and they were struggling to kind of connect with other people in the system. Often they didn't know who to talk to, and they weren't sure if what they were doing was an issue or whether there were other things going on. So we started to kind of explore the idea of what would happen if we connected those organisations together at a very local level and tried to build capacity between them and look at like a kind of peer support situation, and then grow that out and bring referral partners on board during that process, but also kind of bring system partners with us, but starting very much at the grassroots. And we were also looking for a way of modelling this that could be sustainable for the providers, but also the participants, and create lots of little networks all over. So this idea of kind of hubs, which isn't new for sure, but certainly hubs of people offering nature-based experiences, there wasn't so much of that going on. And the vision when we set out was to look at kind of developing these all over Derbyshire, but we started with two areas, Bolsover and the kind of southeastern area, which was largely Erewash and South Derbyshire, but also borders Derby, so quite a good access to population. And we worked there initially because that's where the energy was, that's where there were people who really wanted to test out something different that was around bringing people together and kind of starting in a slightly different place to normal. We also wanted to develop ways of working which would be sustainable, so looking at kind of networks rather than hierarchy, so lots of kind of circles everywhere where people were kind of mobilized to support each other and lean into what each other was doing, so that we could get this like greater understanding of how nature-based activity was being provided but also accessed, and what could make it better and what were the issues. We knew that finance was going to be a long-term issue, and how do you support people who are providing this kind of activity in the long term, and that's still a real head scratcher for us. But this has perhaps opened people's eyes to a different way of operating, which is less about funding and more about long-term financing, and how do we draw in money to this work rather than keep going to the table and begging for grants here and there. So that's kind of where we started, with the idea that referral partners would connect with the providers, and once that started to happen, people would then access other opportunities within each of the hubs. So if you just move to the next one, please, Sarah. So we were successful in accessing £100,000 from NHSE personalisation budget, and that started in October. So we're well on through that piece of work, and it was very much to model behaviours, connectivity, ways of working that could then be extrapolated out. So the first area in Erewash, that's led, the collaborative is led by Elephant Rooms, which is a lovely CIC, which has a lot, well, it's basically kind of a converted barn and has a lot of rooms that they rent out, but they also offer holistic support to people who are struggling with their mental health. So while they also provide services, but they have a lot of people coming in to the building to access other things that people other independent people offer. So they were already quite well connected in their community, and they had relationships with a small charity offering water-based activity, Blue Tonic. So they had just started a piece of work where they had a choir, a men's choir down by a canal in Long Eaton, that was just starting to get off the ground. And they also offer water-based activities in Long Eaton at the open water area there. The other two are horticultural based settings. Whispering Trees, fairly comprehensive, with a strong leaning towards education, and Helping Hooves, which is more of a kind of outdoor area with allotments and a few animals. So intentionally quite small, started with 3 or 4 organisations that got together and spent quite a lot of time getting to know each other, talking about what was going on in their work, reflecting on the things that they were finding were successful, but also the things that they found really difficult. And a lot of the things they found difficult was trying to access the system. So they would go to meetings, they would engage with things that were put on, but they were still kind of felt like they were on the back foot and not in the kind of professional network, as it were. So just coming together helped them feel more confident in what they were doing. And they then identified others in their space who they invited to join the collaborative. So Long Eaton Community Garden joined, and then other sessions like walking groups. There's various things going on in that area that they've kind of added to their menu of activities. So they made a real intentional effort to connect with referrers, so social prescribing link workers and all the other people involved in that work. They invited people to the place, they showed them what they did, and they started to develop quite a comprehensive database of people who could potentially refer into them. And that's not necessarily just clinical settings, but also church groups, food banks, community organisations. They've also got very good connections with the refugee centre in Long Eaton, where there are 400 asylum seekers based there, many of which are really struggling with their mental health. And they've been able to assist a lot of people in those hotels to join activities within the community. Some of them perhaps haven't been right for the first setting, but have then joined something in another place because that was more appropriate for them. So that shared knowledge between the providers has proved really valuable for the participants. So just thinking about the finance model, they've tried to address this as part of their work together. They wanted to use the funding as close to the participants as possible. So we worked with Rethink, who kind of were the banker for this funding part and held the money and distributed it for us. And each of the organisations in the collaborative drew down funding and have used it to enable them to provide activities for the participants. So this map that's in front of you now shows the number of people who've been accessing activities up to March. Since then, it's grown and grown and grown, and we've now got a situation where many of the groups are full to capacity. In fact, last week there was a craft group at Elephant Rooms, and they had double the amount of people that they could deal with, so they've had to introduce a new facilitator, which in many ways is really good, but it's also it's kind of, the issues are evolving, and that communication between the referrers and the settings they're on it all the time to make sure that people are introduced in an appropriate way. They don't just turn up on the day, and that's, you know, that's always difficult. But because they've got these relationships with individual referrers now, and it is very much come along, join in, they're able to explore kind of what to do about the oversubscription together, rather than it just being a provider issue. And in just thinking about the money as well, they've decided to try and draw down funding for the collaborative to be used across that area. So they applied for some funding from Derbyshire Mind to help with transport, and they were successful. So they got £5,000 to help with bus fares, taxis, to enable people to access activities across the collaborative. That in itself, I think they went through this whole process of doing a funding application together and how that would work out and who's going to hold the money, and how they would be accountable for that without it being too administrative for the host. So trying to always look at that shared responsibility and who's best placed to take on that kind of lead role, but always trying to keep it light touch wherever possible. And whenever they meet, it's in a place, they try and move it around from different settings, and it's kind of always about the participants and the activities, and as at the forefront of everything, which I think speaks a lot to the personalisation ethos. But now they're having to explore kind of how do they keep this going and how do they grow it outwards and bring more providers on board. But good problems to have. The Bolsover provider collaborative is slightly different in that that's coordinated by the CVS in Bolsover. So they engaged with 3 providers that they had good connections with in terms of Rhubarb Farm, Plesley Pit Country Park and the Woodlands Enterprise, and got them together in a room to start conversations. And again, very relational work, talking, exploring, reflecting together about what's going on. And very quickly, Rhubarb Farm started sharing training resources between the other providers, and they started attending each other's events and sessions. And that support from provider to provider has enabled them to be, I think, far more brave in what they're doing than they would have had they been doing it on their own. There's a lovely video been produced by the Woodlands Enterprise of a programme they delivered for 3 months, and the participants all want to continue, and they've now hooked up with the other providers. So they're attending sessions not just at the Woodlands Enterprise, but also at Rhubarb Farm and Plesley Pit. And they're also going to the CVS to explore where there are volunteering opportunities across the whole of Bolsover. So it's really opened their eyes to opportunities available in that area that they perhaps, well, I would say for sure wouldn't have otherwise. Interestingly, the Bolsover Collaborative have decided to brand themselves, so they've called themselves a social circle, and that's really helped them in talking to other people within the area about what they're doing, why they're doing it together, and the ethos of their work. So they've been able to present at the Health and Wellbeing Partnership, at the CBS network, and shortly to present at the Place Alliance. And because they've got a brand and a very clear kind of understanding of who they are and what they're doing, it's really helping them to get traction with other partners. Some of the successes in this area are different to Erewash. It's a very different population in Bolsover, and people are less willing to kind of try new things and travel, and it tends to be a little bit more spread out also. But some of the developments are different in that they've started sharing volunteers between the different settings. So Rhubarb Farm were finding that they had an overflow of volunteers at one point, and people approaching them saying, I'd really like to do more. So they were then able to share that with Plesley Pit, and some of them came over and started to help out with activities. They've done a lot more kind of engagement with people, particularly visitors to the country park. So they've asked people about their mental well-being, and it's fascinating because when they started asking people in a very informal way, people were like, oh no, I'm fine. And then they'd noticed that they reappeared a week later and said, actually, I would actually like to talk to somebody. And it's taken 3 or 4 kind of interactions for people to be really honest, and then they've then found something, an activity or an opportunity at the park that's enabled them to get much more involved, and some of them are now working there in the cafe. So the progression opportunities are far beyond what we ever imagined might happen here, because they've put so much effort into connecting people together, rather than just delivering activities. I would say, I mean, this is all kind of live at the moment, and there are things emerging all the time that are really interesting and kind of noteworthy for this work. I think that a lot of the success of this has been about the kind of conditions that were created and allowed for at the beginning. So rather than diving straight into delivery, we did spend quite a lot of time just bringing people together and enabling that kind of rapport, relationship, and honesty between providers who traditionally have found themselves competing against each other. So a very different kind of circumstance, because they've gone from kind of elbowing each other to get money to actually coming together and being on the same team. And that's changed a lot of how the opportunities have developed in those areas, and the capacity has also developed. But creating conditions for mutual respect, reciprocity, so people are giving and taking all of the time, and really leaning in to support each other, and recognizing each other's efforts, and doing that, kind of wholeheartedly, using social media, and being honest and reflecting. So at the beginning of each session, in both settings where they come together as a group, they spend time reflecting and saying, what's been going on in your work? It's not overly agendaed. It's time to be honest and say, well, we had this, we've had that, this is difficult, or this is going really well, and then those things are explored as a group. And I think that kind of mutual support has gone a really long way to enabling them to promote what they're doing and connect outwards in a way that they just weren't doing before. I think being clear about their purpose and taking action together. So they did a little bit, and then they stopped and reflected. They did a little bit more and reflected, and on and on. and being accountable to each other, I think, is absolutely fundamental to this working. Yes, they're accountable for the money that's been allocated, but the thing that makes it work is they want to do it for each other, and they don't want to sit around the table next time they meet and someone hasn't done what they said they were going to do. So because they all really care about this work and they care about what they're doing together, they take action and they do what they say they're going to do. I think there's another slide, is there? Oh yes, here's your video.
Do you want me to play the video? Is there anything you want me to
I'll just finish up with the finance side. So it is a very kind of suck it and see process, and we're so grateful to the funders and the people who've led this from the ICB for being brave and kind of going with it, because it is counterintuitive, I think. And my other work is in the ICB, and I kind of recognise how risk averse we are generally. And this was risky. Nobody knew what was going to happen, and nobody kind of foresaw how we were going to develop it and what the next steps would be. So I'm very, very grateful for the bravery of kind of giving this a bit of protection and allowing people to get on with it, and for things to emerge very naturally. We've got loads to talk about now, so it's really paid off. But we're all very clear that there isn't an obvious source of finance for grassroots organisations to access to do this work properly. There's still huge reliance on small grants and bits and bobs of money here and there, and nobody can plan like that. So we have to be brave again and think about how this is going to be financed in the long term to enable this to flourish. Some of the modelling that's being explored at the moment is about a hub approach. So the collaborative has a joint pot of money, and they then apply for funds as a collaborative and then use it as and when they need it. So there are funding streams available to support this work, but they're going to have to work a bit more strategically to access that money and those opportunities. And I think we've got growing evidence now to share with the ICB around this model actually working and it requiring investment and requiring finance in the longer term, even if we start with small amounts of money, but that's recurrent funding year on year, so that people feel confident enough to invest their own time and energy and hearts and souls into this in the way they're doing now. So I feel like we're at a bit of a tipping point with this, and between now and October, it's very much about gathering the evidence. We've got so many case studies of individuals and groups of people that have transformed their mental well-being as a result, and are now working as part of this, as part of the delivery side. We're not short of evidence, that's for sure, but we need to pitch it in a way that is going to be taken seriously.
Thank you, Andrea. So this might be something that's explored later down the line, perhaps. Let's play the video and see. Can you hear it? Like, I just realised I didn't put.
Not really.
You can hear this. I didn't put share down. Sorry, just remembered that. Let me just.
The world was full of
Can you hear it
triangles.
now? Yeah.
Yes.
Human organizations, like companies, that are solid, top-down, and pretty inflexible. Then the internet happened, making it easy for people to collaborate between and outside triangles as open communities working for a common goal. Call them circles, collectives of people working together on software, community projects, activism, just about anything you can think of. This circle is a collective called Spherio. They build open source software. Like many circles, they're open and flexible. Spherio has contributors and users around the world, and it isn't owned by anyone. It's hard being a circle in a world designed for triangles. Spherio sometimes needs things like a bank account and a way to pay taxes, but they don't want to stop being a circle. The Pyramid Company loves Spherio's open source software. It's critical to their business, and they want to support it. But in our world, triangles can only give money to other triangles because they need things like invoices. Open Collective is a home for circles in a triangular world. We provide the tools circles need to thrive. We make it easy for circles to fundraise, accept sponsorship, and pay expenses without needing to become a triangle. Everything on Open Collective is fully transparent, giving circles and their supporters access to financial info whenever they need it. We take care of taxes, admin, reporting, accounting, so Spherio can focus on their code and their community. Now, circles and triangles can live happily ever after, and together we can start smoothing out the corners of this triangular world.
That is a world where triangles and circles can live. So I hope it's obvious from that video that what Andrew has just shared is very much the circles have really come together, and we refer to that as hubs. And there might be an opportunity where software or platforms such as this that allows them to still be, a collective without. But obviously we've had an example where they have branded and become a entity in themselves, but equally don't necessarily have to follow that with being an organization with a separate bank account, etc. That this could be a potential way of collaboration that can support those community groups or that relational hub model. So me and Andrew have done well. Andrew's done some good talking there, and I don't want to go into loads of detail. So this is a great opportunity to put your hand up or come off mute and ask any questions, share any thoughts, and if it goes a little bit silent, I'll start going into lots of questions. But equally want to give people the floor. So Edward, come on in.
Yeah, hi, thank you for your presentation, very interesting. Just wanted to make sure I got this in my head correctly, because I was distracted partway through, unfortunately. So you have a hub where you have someone working, and I wonder who creates the hub and who employs the person that does that. They bring together several providers, possibly as many as they can manage, work with them to offer the services of that new collective to people who would refer into them. That's basically the model, right? Is that correct?
Not exactly. The
Okay.
second part is correct. The first part isn't. They don't employ anybody. So the hub kind of coordinator is a role. And in one of the examples that I showed, that role is undertaken by one of the providers. So it's like a, I guess, lead provider role, but they take on the responsibility for coordinating. For example, they invited the first 3 organizations to join in, and they play this coordinating role. And last week, one of the organizations had an issue, a challenge that a housing association had made an inquiry and wanted like this massive booking with lots of people, and they were a bit unsure about if they could cope with that and how they should go about handling such an unusual request. So they put it to Jean, who organises the collaborative through Elephant Rooms, and he shared it with the group as like a question. So they did a bit of crowdsourcing of wisdom, and everyone replied within an hour with what they thought were the issues and how they thought it would be best to go about it. And for me, as a kind of enabler, I'm copied into a lot of things and I don't necessarily participate, but I just thought that the value of that was massive. And so the coordinator role is someone who kind of sees what's going on and facilitates the work. They do have an enhanced kind of payment for that role, but it's nothing like employing somebody. We've intentionally set it up so a huge percentage of the funding goes to the provision, not employing people, and we've tried to avoid administration and you know, getting sucked into that kind of thing wherever possible, and just keeping it as light as we can.
And I just wanted to add on to that. I wondered if this creating the hubs makes it easier to apply for funding because you've got a greater number of people working together.
Yes. Yeah. So it seems to be a really good way of coming together and applying for funds that can be then distributed at a local level based on need.
I think that was a good example with the transport provided.
Yes.
That 5K.
Yeah.
Thank you, Edward, and thanks for those responses, Andrea. Duncan, was it yourself next and then Monica?
Thank you, and really interesting, Andrea. Really found that very interesting. A quick question really on what the ICB is requiring of you in terms of evidence that the project's working, essentially, and whether that is qualitative and quantitative, like sort of insight data that you're having to provide in terms of, just for sake of argument, reduced GP practice visits, for example. But how are you, like, because the ICB, preventative health, all those messages that are coming out, the bang for their buck is they're going to want to see an impact on service delivery. And I'm just wondering what they've requested of you and how you were actually demonstrating that.
Yes, thank you. Good question. And I didn't cover it as much as I wanted to. So thanks for asking. Yes, so the main indicator is participation. So we're gathering data on where referrals come from and how many and whether they turn up. So in March we had the Southeast Collaborative had 80 referrals and 67 attendances, which is, we were really pleased about that that level. And they'd beyond that they'd had 108 participants. So it kind of showing that people are joining in, not just when they're being directly referred. The other indicators are around stories. So stories have changed for participants, and like I said, they're coming thick and fast now because people have been involved for quite a long time, and they are really varied. We're using a kind of structured way to gather those stories, so we're getting consistent evidence coming back of where people were when they started, what was going on for them, what the kind of provider, and that in many cases it's people leading activities in those settings. So they will complete this form with the participants several times throughout their journey, and then we can track change. So I'm a huge fan of combining quantitative and qualitative data, and really believe that we can tell stories in a way which are very compelling. So we've got some videos and some short films that people have done as part of this work. So we're gathering quite a lot of evidence now. The ask from the ICB was intentionally not too onerous. It was to give an overview of how this had worked, but also to give us opportunity to share that story, not just the story of the participation data, but how this happened and what are the behaviours that and the conditions that have enabled change, and the things that haven't worked as well.
Yeah, that's just as important to capture, isn't it? So
yes.
Yeah. Sound very enlightened over your neck of the woods.
Well, no, do you know what it is? I found some really good people and influenced them. There's a lot of people that still need influencing, but we have got a few who really want things to be different.
And you've got some traction now as well with what you've been able to demonstrate over the last 12 months. You've got some traction there to be able to take back now as well. Yes, that's great. Thanks, Angela.
Thanks, Duncan. And from Shropshire, and Edward was from Birmingham, just for the people.
Good to know.
And Monica from NAS. Do you want to come on in?
Hi, thanks, Andrea. That was really interesting. It's great to see how those mechanisms of kind of what we all talk about of moving from, competition to collaboration is an easy thing to talk about, but this is a really great example of that actually happening in practice. So it's been really, really useful. My question, and sorry if you've covered this and I missed it, was about, in terms of the service design of the activities that are then provided, how much does the patient voice kind of feed into that, in terms of how you are making sure that what you're doing is staying relevant to what that need actually is? And patient voice is one, the people that you're ultimately trying to support. How do they feed into the design of these services so that they feel involved and included?
Yeah. Yes, another great question. Thank you. And that goes back to the whole point of this, which is around personalization, and that's what the resource is for, and the modeling. So there's a few ways that happens. One of the ways is that the collaboratives are constantly refreshing their kind of offer as a group, and they do that through feedback from participants. So it's an ongoing kind of process of always getting feedback and then kind of tweaking the opportunities that are available, and that going out to a really wide group of people. So then that gives choice. And it's choice kind of on, it's like a menu, these are all the things that you could join in this area, and this is how they happen, and this is who to contact if you're interested. But also kind of sharing what that looks like, the things that happen in those sessions, so that people have a really true picture of what they might be choosing. And then the other way is through when people are referred certainly to the Southeast Collaborative, as a formal referral, they would first meet with the qualified kind of lead for that area, and they would go through with them like an assessment, and then they would say, what kinds of things would you like to do, and try and match it in the most close and appropriate way possible. And that's someone at Elephant Rooms, and she's a psychologist, so highly qualified and able to do that on behalf of the collaborative. So they have a really good way of having this ethos of personalization in everything they do, and they're always kind of challenging each other on that. So it stays quite high on their own agenda when they're talking and reflecting, and making sure that it is always person-led and not what they want to provide.
Are you happy with that answer, Monica?
Yes, that answers my question. Thank you, Sarah.
I think it's lots of ways. I don't think there's ever one thing that does the job here. It's about working in a way that honors personalization, and that's kind of doing it always in a and thinking about it and making sure that applies in everything that we do.
I'm guessing Duncan might have a response or a question related, maybe. But
no, it's not directly related to that. I noticed on one of the slides, Andrea, that you had the job centre were involved, and I'm just wondering how they are involved, because we're tentatively making links here in Shropshire at the moment with the job centres, particularly around social prescribing. And I just wondered what their involvement's been to date.
Yeah, that was another interesting one. So it came up in one of the reflection sessions with all the providers that Rhubarb Farm were noticing that when people were first accessing the activities there, they were perhaps couldn't do a lot, they weren't working, they were very nervous, anxious, whatever. And as time went on, they became more confident, and then they started volunteering. And then as they volunteered more, they reached the threshold where their benefits changed. And this became a real issue that we wanted to address across the collaborative, and we didn't know if it was about terminology of volunteering, or if it was an actual, this is a real issue that they've reached this point where they shouldn't be accessing as much support financially. So we engaged the job centre and the employment coaches and talked with them about the issue that was coming up, and whether that could be overcome, and what do we need to do together to make that better. So it's an ongoing conversation, really, and for me, another really good demonstration of like challenges that emerge through doing the work together and reflecting together. And then like, so what do we do? And then, you know, actioning that and bringing different voices as part of the conversation. Or you're on mute, Duncan.
So the conversations we're having at the moment are exactly the same as that. And what we're finding is that some of the job coaches as well, offering volunteering as a social prescription and having people build their self-confidence and develop skills and so on via that route. It's like, we don't want them to actually do too much of that because then they like that. And it's and then they stop applying for the actual jobs that are there. So we've got that conversation going on locally as well around that at the moment. But as you say, the good thing is that the conversation is actually happening. Yes. And we're able to discuss those issues and see what the best model is that we can actually then take forward. And we haven't had that engagement with the job centre like we're getting now. So it's same as yourselves really in terms of the discussions.
Something that came up in that conversation locally as well, and this is where the honesty is quite profound, is that when that discussion was happening, some of the providers started to realise that they were maybe holding some of their participants back and hanging on to them because they were good.
Yes.
And they kind of had this like admission to the group, you know, they're like, I think maybe we're part of this problem. And then others, you know, say, well, maybe. And since then, they've let go a bit of some of their more experienced volunteers, and they have then gone on to volunteer or work in other settings. So funny, because some of them have lost some of their good volunteers to some of the other people in the collaborative. But, you know, what a great outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a success, isn't it? Yeah.
That really feels like a collective strength, you know, being built that nearly brings a tear to my eyes, because I think that kind of, like you say, they're historically and still currently, especially particularly because of funding models, are put in that competition. And I know that's been mentioned, but it does prove very difficult to be honest and open about these really challenging things, and that someone isn't going to penalise them. And it just sounds so supportive and nurturing that they're actually nurturing each other. And as a result of almost role modelling that nurturing each other and being honest, that the people they support can do the same, and the framework that they're supported in is, you know, reflective of what they want to see. So we obviously want to see people grow and engage in the things that they would benefit most from. But unless that actually is reflected in the way we work, which is, you know, it's great that there is policy and a shift in the NHS personalisation, but unless we are doing what we want to see happen, you know, we have to role model that as a system or as a place or how we act in order to see that in the people that we support and the way that we support and enable others to I guess, have a better health outcome or stay well and truly preventative kind of ways of working. Obviously conscious of time, there's 10 minutes, but I think great opportunity for anyone else to ask any questions or to share. I'm kind of interested in, you know, I know that in this room, if we just take a couple of people that have asked questions, like Duncan in Shropshire, been lots of examples of how almost mature Shropshire is in their social prescribing. Duncan, do you think it's easier to adopt something like this? And you're already saying about conversations with the job centre versus, I wonder, where Ed's come in from Birmingham and they're starting to want something like this hub model, but perhaps haven't necessarily got the structure or the formulation and haven't been going as long and developed social prescribing, because Shropshire was one of the early pilots, Vanguard pilots. So, you know, you've been running social prescribing for many years. I just wondered whether you know, those in the room feel like what has been shared is there's a bit of or all of that feel applicable to your areas and place of work. So I'm going to direct it now to you, Duncan, to respond, and Edward, and then hope other people might chip in too.
I think what Shropshire's benefited of, like you say, this isn't something that's happened overnight. This has been years in the planning, with a pandemic in the middle that sort of scuppered things for a while. But we have an organisation called the Shropshire Infrastructure Partnership in Shropshire, which is it's a collective by another term. And so we've had that in place for a few years now, and those links that we've created from the organisations that are actually part of that, so Shropshire Youth Association, Energize, who are a sports and fitness charity, ourselves here at Community Resource, Cube, who are a volunteer centre in the north of the county in Oswestry. We work collectively together anyway, so to embed that work with the social prescribing hat on has been easier, I suppose, in a way, because those networks were all, and those links were already there. So like I say, recently we've started the dialogue with the job centre about and the community development officers that we've got around the county who are part of the social prescribing project here. They are making those links, and then they feed that back into SIP. And so then the networks that SIP works with can then flow it out. So yeah, in a sense, we have got that infrastructure in place, and it's knowing now about what else is out there that's best practice that we can copy, pinch, and work with locally. But likewise, if we've got something that we've done here that other parts of the Midlands would benefit from knowing about, we're happy to share the way that we work. So I suppose against some areas, yeah, we are a bit further down the line in terms of what we put in place a few years ago.
Absolutely. So maybe, Duncan, your next step is that financial video.
Yeah.
Trying to get someone to pick it up quickly. Edward, did you want to come in? And
Yeah, I was just going to respond and say that Birmingham's not really in that kind of zone at the moment. It doesn't have that infrastructure in place. And I found the idea of this kind of community hub model really interesting. I'm wondering how it would translate to Birmingham, and wondering if it would be better to organise these community hubs around PCNs, and also adopt any food banks or other organisations that might exist there, so that they're quite hyper-local. And to do that, you'd obviously need, because we're broken into 5 different localities, each locality has 2 constituencies, and with multiple wards as well. So it would require quite a lot of on-the-ground work with specific people to do, but that would be the way I see it kind of progressing here. And it's something that I'm probably trying to follow up with some people kind of outside of this meeting, because it's a really interesting idea.
there is definitely something said, isn't there, Edward, about sharing the idea, and then, like Andrea said, not the whole of Derbyshire just adopted it. There was the 2 that had particular energy and commitment, and so by sharing it, you might find the same, and gives you somewhere to start, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, I really like the way it turns around, because I've heard lots of providers say no one contacts them, whereas this is putting the power into the hands of the providers. So it's a really nice way of doing it.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Esther, come on in.
I really liked the, there was the triangle and all the R's underneath, which was, rapport, relationships, etc. And I love that bit, because I think, there's a great example in Brighton of a sort of a service that's offered specialist social prescribing, but that doesn't happen overnight, with lots of other organisations, and they've come together to provide social prescribing plus with sort of specialist social prescribing. But that is about how were those, this is the thing that systems can't invent, is, Andrea, how did the first hub decide to be? How did they get together with their mates in the first place and trust each other enough to do it? Do you know what I mean? And that's the getting the stone to move. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. And this is like, my life's work.
Yeah.
I think I've just written down like a thought which is overarching for all of this. And one is letting go. And I think so many statutory bodies and quasi-statutory bodies, those who say they're not statutory, but they behave like they are, don't know how to let go, because they're conditioned to control and organise. And I think we've got to kind of take that away somehow and do it in a different space so that they're not required to let go. We're not asking them for permission, we're just doing it, and then we'll show them. So I think finding spaces where you've got people who are brave is the first thing. And I knew the people at Elephant Rooms, and I knew they were working really effectively, doing their thing on a very small scale, but I knew that they had an appetite for this. And I could tell from the way they were that they wanted to do more and they were keen to lead something. That said, they still needed a lot of encouragement and, like Sarah said, nurturing. And the other thing I wrote down was lifting each other up, because that's the thing that makes this work. You know, we lift them up, they lift others up. It's a very mutual thing, and it's putting other people before yourself. So there's one of the things we've noticed in this is there's very, very low ego. You know, when the providers come together, they're not kind of showing off and going, oh, check this out. They're very humble, and there is this real nice atmosphere of humility as part of the work. So I would say find people who have some of those characteristics and behaviors and support them and help them, and you know, enable them to pick a few others who they know who behave like that. And then it does happen. You know, if we create the space and the conditions and keep nurturing it, it will grow. It's like a plant.
So I've done something like, you know, creating dementia-friendly communities, bringing lots of people together to start, you know, doing something. And I've helped start lots of them. And I went on a leadership program and found out that what I was doing was host leadership, where you are sort of leading, but you're not in charge. You're leading, and it's for the benefit of the customer. It's not for the benefit of you lot around the table. And but also I used to go to those dementia-friendly community potentials and go, if you build it, they will come. It's just like that. It's like Field of Dreams, isn't it? You just have to start being the way you want to be, and then the people get it, and then the magic happens when you're all together in that circle. But you can't invent, you know, it's really hard to say this will happen. It's not an A plus B, it's this evolution of this organic, lovely thing. But yeah, so anyway, it's amazing what you're doing. Thank you.
Which is why it's really helpful to do it outside of formal program structures, you know, anything like that. The way that this happened was, you know, they gave us the opportunity, they gave us some resources, said, go off and see what you can muster. Here's some things you need to report on. And I do monthly big reporting, but they don't have to get involved in that. You know, they've got the space, the providers, to be themselves, do what they do really well, and see what happens. And, or, you know, the leading when you're not in charge, absolutely. That, you know, this is all system leadership stuff in action. Going where the energy is, start somewhere, go everywhere. All those little phrases are actually happening in real life through this work. So it is a nice combination of a lot of the theory of system change and just doing it and seeing what happens. So,
just getting on with it. Yeah, absolutely. And well done. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm really pleased to come back and give you an update at the end of the year and tell you, you know, how it's gone and some more learning, if that would be helpful.
That'd be fantastic. And I must, for the purpose of the record, I know a lot of people needing to leave, but from my experience in that first, the opportunity that when it first landed was the money. Admit that was a bit of a carrot, was there, where there's the offer from personalisation to use the money different, to say we've got this money, we want it to go to providers, but and this was an social prescribing advisory group meeting, which are typically, or should be to some extent, held in each ICS area, and if it wasn't for the kind of, to some extent, the resourcing from Greenspring, you set on some work there about the need, and then I know a bit of my part was I made sure everyone was aware in my Derbyshire circle to come to that meeting and to say whether, you know, you should have a say about where this money goes. And I think it was really evident in that meeting, you know, who was really committed and like you say, Andrea, you knew some of those people, and so you were able to say to the personalised care lead, we want to use that money but differently to the commissioning model that you might usually, or the grant model that you might usually do. Are you open to that? And the fact that they said yes, so one, having the money, and two, a yes, were the enablers, as well as the that environment of, we just had a green pilot and was in the midst of that, and we had a bit of, there was a bit of learning and resourcing there. There was a thriving communities, like the network, and the kind of connection in that allowed, because I've never seen so many providers in that meeting. And we're talking about how to get more of them engaged, informed about what's coming up, obviously on the agenda, so it's not always applicable, but to ensure that they're, like I say, kept informed. But I think that that very first meeting for me felt very significant, perhaps because of the role I particularly played in that bit, and it was just such an interesting following on discussion. I would love, Andrea, if we could include in the resources that document that was created with the real values of, what is this and what's it not going to be. Like, we do not want to have another kind of setup that's, people in competition, short-lived, doesn't help, etc., etc. We want something sustainable. And actually the relational came more and more apparent, I think, as it came on, didn't it, as we developed. But I think there were some really fundamental, very exciting for me to hear what the group wanted to achieve, and have that clear shared vision about what that looked like. And so in the doing kind of felt, maybe to some extent, a bit easier because there was a shared common goal around it. And for myself, I had more of an interest of oh, can we have like an open bank where you can see money going in, which does now feel a bit more like a advanced another step on. But with tools that we share, that example, that video, there are things like that out there. And I think we do, there is opportunities where we do need to seize them and say, actually, let's keep growing, keep testing, we are learning outside of our comfort zone. So let's keep doing that, and let's keep pushing. And that's why I sort of posed to Duncan, like, maybe your next step, if we just take the more mature and the less mature, Shropshire should really be challenged, going, well, how do you have this kind of transparent bank and more flow for the VCFE sector, But then I'd be saying to Birmingham, well, actually, I think, how do we start sharing this idea and creating this energy for communities to go, oh, I can play that leading role, or I can really see myself being part of that collective and really contributing. I really like that and want to be part of that. So it's, every area is going to respond differently to this learning and this kind of growth that's coming out. So absolutely would love to do an update. And I think, for those that are either watching this back or being part of the conversation now, it's about going, where are you now, and the opportunity of doing that social prescribing maturity framework. That could be really insightful to go, where are our gaps? Do we feel that we're doing things well enough, and does it feel very top down? Is there more we could be doing to empower and encourage a bottom-up approach in our area? So maybe that's a challenge to people. Maybe that's a welcome thought. But yeah, they're my final reflections. So I appreciate we've gone over.